The Holy Gospel according to John, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When the people saw the sign that he had done, that is, the loaves and the fishes, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid."
Praise to you.
Yeah, praise to
Praise
us,
to
O
you, O
Christ.
Christ.
Yes, please be seated. A couple things about the gospel that that version did not include. One is that they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles when they saw Jesus walking upon the sea. And as someone who went kayaking recently, that is a long way to row, especially in a storm. Let's start with a little game today. You can answer with adjectives, nouns, or verbs, things of long ago, or things of right now. And you can just say your answer, shout them out. What is the first thing you think of when I say boat? Row. Ferry. Okay. All right, good. How about storm? Waves. Yeah. How about judge? Me? Stop it. Judy, nice. Prosecutor, jury, guilty. Innocent. Good. Okay, one more. How about king? Royalty, regal. What else? Savior. God. Queen. Come on, what else you think of? Anything current before adjectives, nouns, verbs? King. What? Ah. Yeah. Reign. Throne. Burger. Okay. So here's the bonus round. Of those 4 words, boat, storm, judge, king, which of those 4 do you think is the most important in today's 4 readings? Well, you heard 3. Boat, storm, judge, king. Storm. It's king. It's king. But it's interesting that you thought storm, because when I read today's gospel, I thought to myself, in the past, I've always kind of imagined that the waves were choppy, but they weren't like the big killer wave that covers your whole screen in the theater, and you like back up, right? And it fills you with terror. And when I read it this time, that's what I pictured, and I think that's representative of what we've all been through, right? But king is the word I'm going for today. The clearest thread that ties the readings together is of people wanting a king. In 1 Samuel, the elders in the community recognized that Samuel's getting old and that his sons would not follow in Samuel's footsteps, at least in terms of his leadership and how he conducted it. So they asked for a ruler to judge them, which made Samuel uncomfortable. So Samuel went to talk to the Holy One himself. And the Holy One said to Samuel, "Hearken," which means listen, "to the voice of the people in all that they say to you. For it is not you that they have rejected, but it is me they have rejected from ruling over them." In Acts, which we didn't read, Paul is teaching in the temple about Jesus the Messiah. In fact, some of the Jewish people, including women, were persuaded by Paul's teaching, which of course upset the status quo and led to jealousy by some of the other Jews. Those Jews, we did read this one, we did, enlisted, Gaffney calls it, some immoral men in the marketplace to form a mob, is the way she translated it. A gang of sorts to stir things up. The immoral mob attacked Jason's house, where Paul and Silas were staying. And when they could not find Paul and Silas, they settled on dragging Jason outside, simply because he hosted the troublemakers who dared to suggest there was a king to follow who was not of this world. And by the end of the reading, we know that specifically the Jews who had Jason dragged outside and had sought to harm Paul and Silas, their real reason was that Paul was teaching in opposition to the decrees of the emperor. The primary difference between a king and an emperor would be the emperor had a larger territory, more money, more power, and could rule over the king. So you might say the emperor was a super king. In the gospel, it's easy to overlook the reference to the king because we focus on the storm, the fear, and Jesus walking on water. But if we back up and focus on the intro to that scene that I read, it said that Jesus withdrew to the mountain to be by himself when he realized the people were about to kidnap him. The version you heard said take him by force, but Gaffney translated it as kidnap, and I kind of liked that. All of this made me wonder, what is it about kings? It seems like there have always been kings, known by a variety of names. Kings often come to power because they have the most resources, the most strength. They're born into the right family. And even as we call Jesus the King of Kings, we rarely think of him in the way that we think of earthly kings. And Jesus himself, at least in today's lesson, never wanted the title or the crown. So what is it about kings? Why do we still lean into having them today? Or if not having them ourselves, keeping the word king as part of our culture? I mean, Disney princesses get a lot of attention. But actually, Disney also has lots and lots of kings, right? We got King Mufasa, King Simba, wannabe King Scar, King Neptune, King Arthur, and my personal favorite, the orangutan, King Louis in Jungle Book, who loved being king so much that he even sang about it. Oh, I'm the king of the swingers, oh, the jungle VIP. I reached the top and had to stop, and that's what's been bothering me. But I digress. Why is a title like king, which feels somewhat archaic, still something we use today, not just people, but everywhere? Besides Burger King, there's games that involve kings. There's checkers and chess every time we pull out a pack of cards. I understand the King Tut exhibition is in Detroit. We have king-size drinks and King Kong movies. No, they are not appropriate for a church confirmation class, I'm here to tell you. And lots of kings in sports. It's hard to deny that we have a certain fascination today with kings and queens. It certainly isn't because kings and queens are above corruption. Not at all. Surely there have been as many, if not more, horrific royal leaders as there have been good ones. And some pretty good royal leaders got a bad rap because it justified their subjects not adhering to royal protocols, but instead doing whatever they wanted. Some even make a case for the Declaration of Independence that it began as a piece of propaganda because the founding fathers were angry at King George III for not intervening on their behalf with Parliament soon enough. But King George had many other problems confronting him as king, and it's possible that the vilification of him, which led to the writing of the Declaration of Independence, increased his resolve not to settle the dispute unless we actually won the war militarily. Britain, in fact, didn't come out of the American Revolution too badly. Under King George's leadership, Britain quickly recovered from the war, quickly being a relative term. Later in his life, King George's mental health caused him to step aside and let his son rule. But as one historian wrote, King George III was no tyrant. He was actually a pretty good king. But the founding fathers needed a villain to get the fence sitters on their side. So George III got the devil's horns. It's interesting, isn't it? The way that we use the term king when we both want a strong leader and when we want to say that leader is not who we wanted. So what do kings actually do? Besides, this might be before you, calling for their pipe and their bowl and their fiddlers 3. According to Tolkien, the king is a goblin because he's the biggest, meanest goblin of all. Of course, that's why he would be king. Goblins, of course, operate entirely on the principle that might makes right. King Cyrus of Persia seems like a great king. He gave freedom of speech and religion to other nations under his flag when Seleucids forced Jews to pray to Zeus. The first king in the Bible has the unfortunate name of Nimrod. His story is told in Genesis 10. At the time, the name Nimrod was equivalent to mighty hunter, but try to get the teasing to quiet down long enough for him to explain that. And arguably, as the January 6th hearings continue to show undeniable truth about what took place on that day in 2021, we are painfully aware that there are many in this country, ironically known as the land of the free, who seem to think these United States should be run something like a kingdom. Despite the fact that our democracy is supposed to be a government by the people, for the people, the words and actions of those who think the 2020 election was stolen seem to suggest they want to adopt a form of government in which the president is more like a king, even to a point where a president's children should be granted the presidency by succession. What? And possibly the most troubling of those who hold this viewpoint is that they seem to welcome the president having absolute power in the same way we tend to think of kings having absolute power. Kings that go around saying things like, off with his head, and nearly make it so. So let's distill this down to just the gospel. The storm was a concern for sure, but that wasn't the trouble for Jesus. The trouble for Jesus was the possibility that they might kidnap him and try to make him a king, presumably with the expectations that came with an earthly king. Similarly, in our world, there's no shortage of storms, both literal and metaphorical, that we would like Jesus to calm. Yesterday, please. The larger trouble for us in America right now seems to be the extent to which many in this country are crying out for a king of sorts, an authoritarian leader who will judge the people based on his own criteria, his own biases that may or may not be made known to those being judged. And that's just one of many issues we are facing in the world, in our country, and even in the institution of the church, which speaks about inclusion, while upholding constitutions and rules of order that systematically keep white supremacy in place. So how do we live faithfully at a time of such angst and turmoil? The rest of the gospel is the part we gravitate toward. Jesus walks on the water after withdrawing to a mountain. This miraculous act demonstrates that he is not of this world, and he will not be reduced to this world's rules and hierarchies and anxieties. Hierarchies and the damage that those who wield power over people can do are being exposed so often and so loudly right now that it feels like we are in a storm ourselves. The exposing of abuses by the powerful and the desire by their followers for them to continue their abuse as if it's justified, believing that this is the will of God, is heretical, tragic, and dangerous. And yet, in the words of James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And right now, we are living through the facing part, and the waters are choppy. Which is why, right now, it's important for us to talk about Jesus, to remember that it is Jesus who we follow, to evaluate decisions based on the things we know that Jesus taught, that Jesus did, that Jesus said, the things that Jesus commanded us to do, beginning and ending with love one another. Love. It's what enables us to think about these things that are hard to talk about and hard to face. Love is what enables us to come together after 2.5 years apart and gradually find our way closer to fine. Love is what has worked for elders and ancestors across the ages who have passed down to us this gift of faith because they knew from what they lived through, it's the only thing you can count on. Jesus. God, whose name is love, is the reigning principle as followers of Jesus Christ, who, according to the visions of John of Patmos in the book of Revelation, this Jesus Christ who will come again. And when he does, some will be so surprised to see he has a tattoo on his thigh. It will say, King of Kings.
With great Who is mighty, full of